Truey Conversations, giving the environment a voice.
Hello and welcome to Truey Conversations. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're coming to you from and pay our respects to elders past and present. My name's Kathy McLeish. I'm a senior journalist with the ABC and your host for today, along with Truey's Dr. David Waters.
Hey, Kathy.
We'll introduce our guest, Rob Wheatley, shortly. But first, Dave, can I get you to just set the scene and tell us what your definition of natural capital is?
Thanks, Kathy. So my tweak on the textbook definition of natural capital is it's the renewable and non-renewable assets such as land, water, air, soil, and all living things that we value environmentally, economically, socially, and culturally. Now, interesting thing is that when we've talked to different people from different industries, people have a different view on what natural capital means to them. And I guess that was part of our motivation for running the Natural Capital Truey Conversation series, is that it'd be nice to hear from people from different sectors and different industries and get their take on natural capital and how it impacts on them and their business and how they're incorporating it as part of their business.
Fantastic. Which leads us to Rob Wheatley, our guest. Welcome, Rob. I'll introduce you first and just, your very extensive sort of background in this area. You've worked extensively across Australia and New Zealand for the past 20 years in permanent tree and bind crop industry. You've managed large horticultural enterprises, family farming and corporate enterprises. Most recently, you've taken up a role as General Manager of Euroley, which operates 800 hectares of almond orchards in the New South Wales Riverina region and is actively building a 2,000 hectare tree nut portfolio. So Rob's role is to oversee current assets and to expand and grow the portfolio. Very interested in natural capital and believes it's important that the company demonstrates to shareholders that their investments are sustainable and form part of their ESG reporting requirements. Euroley is a subsidiary of Rock Partners, which manages capital for some of Australia's largest institutions and superannuation funds.
And we won't hold it against him that he supports the Kiwis either.
Come on. Yeah, I mean, this is such an interesting area of, where natural capital fits as well, and obviously the growth area. Rob, thanks for joining us. Just first of all, tell us about yourself and your role in the natural capital sector.
Well, where do I start? I guess it goes way back from my early days. I come from a farming family in New Zealand. We're originally dairy farmers, and I think when I was around 12 years old, we moved into horticulture, where my father planted up apple trees and stone fruit trees on bare land in New Zealand in a province called Hawke's Bay. I've always had this affinity towards agriculture in general, really. I carried on dairy farming for a little while, and then in my late teens, early 20s, I won a scholarship to Washington State in America to study apples, particularly over there. That was a great experience for me. Back in the early 80s, America was seen as being quite proactive in agriculture and quite forward in their thinking. Learnt a lot then, and particularly large family organisations and corporate, and came back to New Zealand and carried on with family farming and my own enterprises as well. I guess in my early 30s, this family enterprises sometimes would get sold up, and I found myself looking for a job and ended up in Australia, in Batley, New South Wales, in the Stony Mountains, on a very large apple and stone fruit property. And that was quite an experience for me, and kind of showed me some interesting aspects of marketing versus New Zealand, where they were single desk marketing New Zealand versus quite open domestic free trade within Australia. And also through the period of the early years in Australia, understanding the importance of water, where New Zealand had abundance of water and Australia we didn't. And so kind of gave me a really good grounding in terms of understanding that sort of thing. I guess I've always had an interest in food. I suppose the grandparents used to bottle and freeze everything. We had, we produced food for ourselves, and I guess the love of food. So I've moved from there, and we went into our own business, and then through the last 25 years in Australia, moved into the corporate path, I suppose. It's very large properties, dealing with all sorts of crops, from melons to citrus to table grapes, of late almonds, and I just continued my passion about food production. Really. So just along that journey, I guess, we started moving in towards better farming practices. So we got into biological farming with a very old late gentleman called Ward Penwan from the Sunshine Coast. I went to a seminar of his, and very intrigued with the way he was farming, and quite a change in practice in farming. And so we built a very large project in biological farming practices, saw some amazing things happen within plants in terms of yield, the resistance to certain extremes and weather and that sort of thing from biological farming. And that really kind of started my interest in that. It must have been 15 or 20 years ago, in that side of it. And then from that point, moving into permanent farming and using biological type farming systems and permanent farmers as well. So we saw some really interesting results with, like I said, pest and disease, changes in weeds, and the growing patterns of plants and all sorts of things. And to this day, we get into integrated pest management type practices, cover cropping, all sorts of things. So yeah, it's kind of been quite a full story, and still to this day, greatly supporting what we do on farm currently.
Yeah, amazing sort of results and changes. Was it a real shift in your thinking as well, and the way you approach natural, your understanding of natural capital?
Yeah, absolutely. So we saw, and I guess it was driven from the results we saw. So the learning of how to change our practices from what we would call normal practice to biological type systems, in terms of how we looked after the soils. We were taught, we went through courses and we taught about what to identify in soils in terms of microbiota and all sorts of things in soils that were good, the organic matter, the importance of that, the importance of IPM type systems, so integrated pest management, so utilising beneficial insects to combat other insects, or pests in crops, and the results of that. So an example of that would be in Mundubba, where we're farming table grapes, which is known for a very large issue with Queensland fruit fly. We ended up going from something like using 10 chemicals 10 times through the season to maybe targeting a particular block once a year. And so the predators manage that sort of that pest. There's all sorts of examples like that I think it's the power of biology and natural resources, I guess, that I can see. I mean, I'm a very strong advocate, I suppose, of looking after pollination and bees and that sort of thing, and the need for us to create habitats for bees that gives them a variety of within their dietary needs, and rather than putting them in an almond orchard and it's just almond flour, we grow cover crops in it, so we create a variety of plant and food types for the bees and the bee health. Which is so important to food security, et cetera, et cetera.
It's interesting because coming from a research background, it's often we probably get criticised if we do research on experimental stations, you know, and it doesn't reflect what's happening in the industry. But you've had your own backyard to play with and apply your knowledge from, you know, your scholarship in New Zealand, in Australia, in you know, in field, which is fantastic. And so I guess you're setting up your own real experiments just out there in the paddock, right?
Well, it's a lot of experiments, but it becomes practice. So it becomes our normal practice. So there's certain things that we would do in field, you know, different practices for looking out for bees, different practices for looking out for our soils and what we need to do. Not applying certain chemicals to the soils to protect the microbes within the soil, understanding organic matter, what we need to do with utilising organic compost and that sort of thing, and the power of that. It's not taken away. We're not suggesting we go totally organic, but there's an interaction between both organic and inorganic, I guess, that we can actually, I think, have really good farming practices, but there's a change in mindset that needs to happen. And I guess then, you know, how do we look after our soil? How do we look after our environment? How do we look after our waterways? All those sort of things. And I think for me, it just means that how do we look after well-being and the population, I guess, and farming in a different way that really does create a positive outcomes, I guess.
Yeah. Look, you've definitely touched on it and you know, gone into this in questions, but it would be great to, you know, sort of encapsulate it in one section as well, which is how do you define and describe natural capital and what does it mean to you?
Well, I guess it's the value that comes from everything in nature and natural resources. So water, air, soil, insect life, bird life, everything. I guess it's the value of that. And I guess it's always difficult to put a certain value on it other than what we create, I guess, and how we create change. What it means to me is just what I'm contributing, I suppose, personally, and what our company is contributing to the general well-being of mankind for us at the end of the day. But it's a slow burn. It's not easy, you know. It's there's a change that needs to be acknowledged in terms of the way we do things, and the challenge, and we'll talk about challenges soon. But it is for us as farmers is creating a change that's not to the expense of yield and quality of the, I guess, of the food that we produce.
Mm-hmm. Which leads us on to that. You know, what do you see as the greatest challenge that the industry faces going forward?
Well, I think, Kathy, there's many, to be honest with you. I think one of the big, well, there's a lot of challenges, I think, and a couple of them, I think, to start with, would be the education and information comes to the farming industry. I suppose if I can talk about the whole industry, is just whereas we need education, I suppose, to create the change. We need the motivation fee to be able to, and the information to be able to change. But we also need to see the results. So we've got to see, I guess, the reality of the change. So realistic, the changes that are realistic that people an outcome and a good outcome. So, some of the biggest issues that I find is that, you know, how do you trust the information? There's so much information out there, that, particularly in this whole natural capital type space, with carbon and carbon sequestration and all that sort of thing, is trusting the information that's coming at us, because it's a little cloudy out there at the moment. It's a little bit grey, and there's I think a lack of understanding as well. I think that's where the education piece comes in. And I think from there is then how do you measure change? You know, so what is the base? How do you measure the base, and then how do you measure change from there on after the years and years? for a positive result. And I think that's challenging as well. I'm not sure that the industry has found that measurement yet. I mean, we use all sorts of tools at the moment that help, total package, if you like. So we measure water quality, we measure water leaching, we measure salts going out and leaching through the soils and, potentially into waterways. We have plant measurements where we measure plant health through technology. There's a lot of tools out there that can help us, but I'm not sure that we've actually come to a tool that can measure the health of soil and the health of the environment necessarily. So I see some of those sort of challenges, setting realistic goals for organic carbon. And we're in an extremely large country. Most part of the country is very poor in soil carbon, soil organic matter. And we need to be realistic about how do we actually change that and how do we shift that, particularly challenging for broadacre farming. How do we actually realistically change organic matter in a 10,000 hectare property in the west of the range, that sort of thing, on some very poor soils sometimes. And I guess it's the education piece there again, is what is it that we need to do to actually create some sort of change? I believe there's unrealistic figures flying around about, going from 0.5% to 2%. Doesn't seem much, but it's a massive change. And how do you get that product in the soil? How do we build the soils to create those changes? Is quite a challenge. There's cost to it. Are there products for a 10,000 hectare broadacre farmer to help them realistically change? Is there products coming now that's pelletized or granulized? Potentially it has organic matter in it, and be able to apply that with seed at planting time. In horticulture, it's a little bit easier because they're smaller units generally, and we can apply organic fertilizers quite easily. And we can measure it a lot easier. And we're using tools like imagery at the moment, satellite imagery, which can help us understand, are we creating more biomass or not? Are we creating issues, even for habitat for birds? Our project at Euroley in New South Wales, we've got corridors of habitat for a native bird called the superior parrot. And we protect those quite well. We planted trees, etc., to help with that bird habitat. Like say we've grown cover crops to help both build soil organic matter, but also help bees and pollination when they flower and that sort of thing. But I think every sector has their own challenges, whether it's because of size of broadacre, or because we're next to rivers, or the plains fields up north of Queensland next to the sea, and how do we manage nitrogen leaching, for instance? And again, it all comes back to how we're dealing with the soil. How do we create soil carbon matter and turn it into carbon that holds water and stops the leaching, or restricts leaching, benefiting from natural nutrition creation through better soil management. So look, there's lots and lots of challenges out there, I think. But I guess I always come back to what created change for myself, and that was an education piece for me, was buying into the biological farming aspect and seeing the results, both in yield and quality of the yield, but also financially as well.
Rob, just something you said earlier about, it sounds like you're utilising technology. You're clearly, taking what you've learned and putting it into practice. And have you noticed more recently that there's sort of pressure on you from your shareholders and the community to demonstrate, or to report on your impact or your environmental footprint and to communicate better in terms of what you're doing? And I think in the introduction, Kathy, you said, they want to demonstrate to shareholders that they're being sustainable. Do you care to comment on that?
Sure. I'm not sure it's pressure, but I think people are becoming more aware of natural resources and the natural capital out there. And it's something people the shareholders are generally from big cities, and they don't necessarily have much to do with farming itself, but they're interested in what we're doing and in terms of the environment, the soil, the water, and everything else. And I think comes from an awareness that's building through the general population. And it's not necessarily a demand on reporting, but I think they're interested, and they're interested in the report and seeing that we are doing positive things in their portfolios for the benefit of the environment. But it also comes from positive outcomes. So we're looking after the bees. We've got practices that are looking after soil. We have farming practices that look after leaching into waterways potentially. So yes, it comes from an awareness and an interest, I think a natural interest in its building globally, and therefore they're looking for a report. It should never be about ticking boxes. It's always something that's genuine, and I think when we're genuine about what we're doing, we're looking after, for instance, the superior parrot, for instance, it is a bird that is struggling with population. So these are great stories, but they're not the box tick type stories. They're genuine stories that we're wanting to look after naturally.
We've talked about the greatest challenges, Rob. What about the greatest opportunities going forward? Do you see, where those areas are?
I think the opportunity is to build a more resilient agricultural sector, I guess, through changing our practices. It's a slow burn, though. These things don't happen overnight. It's a really slow burn. So it's an education piece. There's case studies, real case studies, and real outcomes that need to be seen and learnt from. I think there's the use of waste, I guess, whether it's vegetation waste or animal waste or both together, and how can we utilise that? There's a lot of media about waste and what we're doing. There's great opportunities there as we get into our own composting of our almond waste and that sort of thing, and putting it back into the soil. We're mulching back and prunings into the soil. So we're seeing that sort of thing. So I think there's great opportunities there. I think there's great opportunities to create products that can help automate that. They've built their soil carbon over years and years, but there's great opportunities in, I think, technology. Where technology is moving as well in terms of being able to monitor and measure things. We're using technology in all sorts of ways now, and no doubt that sort of thing is building in terms of the ability or the availability of different technology. At the moment now we're measuring bee hives at the moment. So bees are in our almonds, and the technology space there is they have sensors in each hive, and we can measure how well the well-being of the bees are through technology. So I think technology is I think there's an opportunity to help us understand and measure our natural capital really well. You have things like the Reef Project, there's the waterways, inland waterways where they're measuring salt, leaching, etc. And it's getting more understanding. So once we build understanding from measurement and technology being able to provide that to us, I think we learn more and more. And I think that's the greatest opportunity. And then changing our farming practice so people see soil health and the well-being for human population. I think using IPM type projects to help do away with chemical applications and all that sort of thing. there's a real movement, I think, in globally on this sort of stuff, and that's the greatest opportunity there.
Do you see an appetite for, do you see an appetite for growth and for development in the area of natural capital?
I think we're starting to see it now. I think the younger people are coming back to the farms, and I think what's capturing their minds is the whole technology space is attractive, and it's becoming quite an attractive thing to lure young people back. It's not like the old days when we're sitting on with a spade or on a tractor without a cab or anything else. Technology is really driving, I think, changes and attracting people back to our agriculture. And I think that's just a wonderful thing. We're seeing new minds, new thinking. The new generation are very, very aware about natural capital and the need to look after it well. And I think that's starting to drive change. And I'm seeing that more and more now, particularly in the last 10 years, more so. But there's been a concern that young people have been driven away from ag. There's quite a hole, I think, in the generational space now that's starting to come back now. And large family entities are driving that with their young people. Corporates are driving this through, essentially, through awareness of shareholders and that sort of thing, but also just what we're seeing in that space in terms of results, returns on the investment, in that chain.
Yeah. So ideally, where would you like to see it all in 5 years?
5 years is quite short, Kathy's.
We mightn't have a look.
Look, I think we just keep building. I'd like to see in 5 years' time, education programs out there and creating this change. Whether we build hubs of growing certain regions throughout every state where there's a hub or something where people can learn different practices and what that might mean to their own businesses. At the end of the day, we need to maintain productivity and quality and yield, and we need to increase it. Actually, we've got a global population growing, and then we've got a shortage of land, and food security is becoming a huge problem. And I think the awareness of that, and so yes, in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, just that seeing that whole movement of change, I guess, to better practices and how we look after our environment, our soils, our water, and that awareness coming from, I think, driven from the young people coming through into agriculture, I think is something that's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. If you had one key takeaway on natural capital and this discussion, I guess, is there one standout point for you?
For me, if I go back to what created the change for me personally, it's really around the education piece and trusting the education or the information that comes from education to be able to create the change. There would be the one thing that really created that change for me personally, and I see that coming through corporate as well. The information, the education, and trusting the advice and the information that's coming from that.
Which is really about getting more understanding, isn't it? Building that understanding, building a common language and standardized.
Yeah, consistency around the language, standardizing things. And really, at the end of it, how do we measure it? I suppose that is key to anything. If we need to create change, we've got to understand where our base is and then where we're getting to, what the goals are, and how do we measure it along the way. It's probably the other thing that I would note.
I probably just got a couple of things. So a few things for me that I took away from what you've said today. It's pretty obvious that I think that experience working in contrasting environments. You said you worked in New Zealand, Australia, and one of the driest continents. I think going from that, from, having abundance of water in New Zealand, I think that's probably been an important learning for you, I'm assuming.
Absolutely.
But the other key point, I think you talked about utilising technology, but also more importantly, and I agree with you, but also about bringing the young people back into the industry. I think there's so much opportunity for young people in agriculture, and having a daughter studying in that agricultural area, I'm really sort of conscious of this, and I think that's great to hear. But the third thing, I think you mentioned the slow burn. I think that's where we the challenge for us is probably, well, how do we take it from a slow burn to a fast burn? And I think technology's got to play a big part of that. And also, I guess, from our perspective, Truey's perspective, we would hope we can develop tools that make it easier for people to, report on condition, report on impact, and demonstrate to the community that, that easily, there's value in what you're doing. But, and I think probably the last thing would be that it shows to me that I think you're sort of putting your learnings into practice, but you've highlighted the value of nature and the importance of nature as an integral part of your business. And I think you made some comment about, it's not probably compromising production, but it's a key part of, of improving your business. So it's not an add-on, I guess it would be my point. So there's value and co-benefits in nature, and it's in part of your business. Would that be right?
Yeah, that's right. And there's a certain balance, right, between what we do with nature, but we've also got a commercial aspect to it as well. So there's got to be that balance where sustainability is not all about nature. It's about being a successful business as well. From a commercial point of view, sustainability reaches both from nature all the way to commerce. And to be sustainable, we have to be profitable at the end of the day. And it's bringing in that balance between the two. And it can be done. We've proven it, particularly with annual cropping. And it can be done, I think, in all aspects of land. It's just having that education piece to understand how to do it well. And it doesn't compromise the success of the business that we have. And at the end of the day, producing food and having food security for the great populace there. At the end of the day, it's all about food security. It's healthy food, it's healthy population, and we've got a big part to play in this.
Yeah, great, lovely. All right. Thanks, Rob. I could chat on this for hours, but
I could too. And I guess it's a passion. It becomes a passion, and maybe because it's a grey hair that you start getting older and you become more passionate about these sort of things. But I'm seeing that passion coming through younger generations, and I think the education of the young people is key to all this for the change.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Kathy.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for your time.
See you, Rob.
See ya.
Right.
Truey Conversations is brought to you by Truey. We create data-driven web applications that give the environment a voice. Thanks to our host, Kathy McLeish, and our regular contributor, Dr. David Waters. Our producer is Kelly Fisher. Our graphics are done by Tash Fens. I'm Bonnie Marsh, co-founder of Truey, and I really hope that you've enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you very much for being here with us, and I look forward to seeing you next time.